Welcome, everyone. Tonight, the Edmund S. and Natalie Rumowitz Annual Lecture, the Caged Bird Sings Poetry Festival, and the Knowles Undergraduate Poetry Award converge to celebrate National Poetry Month, the accomplishments of poets who work, learn, and dwell among us, as well as our incomparable guest, Honorée Fanonne Jeffers.
Nobody is going to ever replace the capacity of a human. And this is why thinking is our number one obsession.
A College of Arts and Sciences education gives you the confidence to bring together all the strands that you value and apply them in ways that are fulfilling for you as an individual.
You have to really look at schools as a place to grow as yourself. And I think that URI does a great job of that.
There's a sense of pride in the work that you put out there. Students are just excited. Whatever field they're in, they want to be the best at it. And I think that's kind of infectious.
The thing that sets URI apart is that we as a faculty and as an institution ask our students not just what you can do, but who can you be?
Let us begin tonight by acknowledging that the University of Rhode Island occupies the traditional homelands of the Narragansett Nation. Since we gather virtually tonight and are physically dispersed, let us also acknowledge that the state of Rhode Island occupies the indigenous lands and waterways of the Narragansett, as well as the Niantic, Wampanoag, and Nipmuc peoples. We honor and respect the enduring and continuing relationship between these nations and this land by teaching and learning more about their histories and present-day communities, and by becoming stewards of the land we too inhabit. Let us acknowledge the violence of conquest, war, dispossession, and enslavement endured by Black and Indigenous communities in what is now the United States. As a land grant and sea grant institution, many of the infrastructures we use and rely on were built through Indigenous displacement, genocide, and enslavement. Contemporary efforts to endure in the face of colonialism must be acknowledged, respected, and supported. I also want to thank our sponsors, which for tonight's event include the Departments of English, Gender and Women's Studies, Africana Studies, the Center for Humanities, the College of Arts and Sciences, and the generous folks at their helms. Thanks are always due to the staff and graduate students of these departments, particularly Sean Default, Anna Vaccaro-Gray, Darcy Lovell, Laura Stifler, and Leah Cooper, to name but a few of the wizards behind tonight's magic. I hold special gratitude for the 5 judges of the Caged Bird Sings Poetry Contest and the Knowles Poetry Award. They are Afua Ansong, Jeria Devant, Elizabeth Folk, Michael Landreth, and Andrew Marasiki. Talented and accomplished poets who are also doctoral students in the English and Creative Writing doctoral program, who were barred by design from the competition. We are literally here today because of the generosity of Edmund S. and Natalie Rumowitz, and that of the family of Erica Knowles. 28 years ago, Ed Rumowitz envisioned an undergraduate seminar offered annually so that students at a Sea Grant institution would be ensured the opportunity to read, write, and think critically about the oceanic world. A seminar that would be enriched by regional field trips across the south coast of Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, and by lectures like tonight's. The Caged Bird Sings Poetry Festival is the more recent vision of Afua Ansong and the dream team of poets in the graduate program. Before the pandemic, Afua imagined a festival, a day of reciting original poems as well as beloved ones, in the diversity of languages that make vibrant our communities. Perhaps next year, we'll be able to have such a festival. It includes, as it does this inaugural year, a contest to honor the poets among us. No members of the English department allowed. Participants were asked to submit a 14-line poem in response to the subjects making, inventing, naming, or creating. Tonight, we announced those contest winners. In the faculty and staff category, our second place winner is Katie Jacobo with La Poesia. For Jacobo, poetry is grounding and liberating. In her poem, Jacobo says she hopes to remind herself and others of how to create the conditions for creativity.
La Poesia. It only finds me when I'm still, makes sure to avoid me when I'm busy. It rains on me in my despair, fuels me in awe, and of course, sneaks up on me in the night, demanding I find a pen in the darkness. If I try to force it, all the words crumble. I can only surrender. Grace is a lot like poetry. It arrives unbidden, reminding us His plans are not our plans. We can only create the right conditions and remember that we are owed nothing.
Our first place winner is Lyle Mook with We Sing of Mothers. Mook's submission was inspired by a multi-generational family gathering where he was moved by the grit and courage of these strong and beautiful women around him. His poem is a tribute to kin and a celebration of the resilient and creative women for which he hopes to convey a deeper gratitude.
Hi, I'm Lyle Mook, part-time professor in philosophy at URI. This poem is a sonnet first drafted for a toast on Mother's Day at a gathering of our extended family. We sing of mothers. I see how some could question creation if they ne'er set foot in a birthing room. The cries and curses and consternation, a miracle parts the watery womb. We sing of mothers who heal with a kiss. They bear up, bear down, unbearably long, and some carried little ones that now we miss. Gave of their bodies the weaker, so strong. May all of our moms stay steady, we pray, and children flourish in our company. The names of the women they love to say, Mommy and Maymay, Nana and Nani. Our vines entwine in this vineyard of kin, the joy of fine wine. Let the feast begin.
I'm not sure I mentioned that Lyle Mook is a lecturer in philosophy. In the graduate category, the second place winner is Carolyn Decker for Balconies, The Balconies. A fond memory of a moment in nature inspired Derek's poem in which a heavy mist limited her view while also giving emphasis to new details. She explains, "It was a moment where I felt profoundly alone and yet clearly present in a robust, if hidden, whole."
My name is Carolyn Decker. This is my entry in the Erica Knowles Caged Bird Sings Poetry Contest. The Balconies. I sat in the fog of the eagle's mouth when he took the shape of the crocodile. 6-seasoned Gary word, in a word, unmade. What was world? Mist. What were trees? My lashes, at the edge of sight. Black as bushfire soaked to ash. Water, what was air? The rock remains, porous, maw, and I, devoured, holding the words between my teeth.
These are great. Our first place winner in the graduate category is Jamie Chatel with Creation Seeds of Spring. The inspiration for Chatel's sonnet comes from the feeling of longing for spring after a gray winter. She aims to capture a sense of romance and to invoke a sense of seasonal joy and excitement.
My name is Jamie Chatel. I'm a graduate student in the MBA program, and my poem is Seed of Spring. Wake up, crocus, first bud to spark the garden. Thaw the soil that winter's frost has wrought to harden. Hours of day, hours of night, sink to your beat. The sun stands straight against the earth, winter's chill retreats. The horned god stirs, brushing snow a-bristle as he wakes. A twisted torque, his spirit yearns, a wife to set him straight. Dance, spring goddess, bring us life, we're tired of the gray. The flowers follow in your steps, gather your bouquet. It's time to wed, sweet maiden, your destiny awaits. With eggs and greens we honor you, fresh feast upon our plates. May you conceive a child, mother, before the shift of time. Bring forth this season of abundance, fertility in prime. Watching as your belly grows, full as the warm moon glows, keep us in your graces, and blessed be our prose.
And now for the undergraduate category. In second place, we have Ariel Finkel, and her poem is Two Names Technically. Poetry allows Finkel to exercise her love for creative writing in a space that empowers her experiment with minimal rules and structure that accompany poetry. The inspiration for her poem stems from her interest in names and name meanings, and why and when we do or don't choose to call ourselves certain things.
Two Names Technically, a poem by Ariel Finkel, double major in Writing and Rhetoric and Biological Sciences, class of 2023. You have an English name and a Hebrew name. Only the English ones scribbled on the inside of your suitcase. If lost, return to one or the other, but never both. How odd it is to have one English name that you must write on everything in looping, navy blue, inky swirls of cursive, and one Hebrew name that you only ever really see, printed inside the sky blue kippah made up for your bat mitzvah. Why is it hidden even there? How odd it is to have one and only one of your names on everyone's tongue and teeth, and the other one vanished from the minds of the masses unless you tell someone about it. They had no idea that you had two names technically. How odd it is that sometimes it slips your mind too. And you want to see what happens if you wrote your other name on your taxes too one time. But everything's online nowadays. Your computer doesn't have a Hebrew keyboard.
For our first place winner, I'm passing the virtual mic to Dean Jen Riley.
Good evening, everyone. This year, we are initiating the Knowles Undergraduate Poetry Award in memory of Erica Knowles. Erica's life was tragically cut short in 2012. At the time, she was a double major in journalism and gender and women's studies. Outside of class, she pursued art, photography, and music, and she was an avid reader and writer of poetry. I'm pleased we're able to celebrate the beauty and the joy and the solace that poetry can bring us as we sustain the memory of Erica's life through this new award. The inaugural award goes to Lila Bovenzi for her poem, Witch's Brew. For Lila, Poetry has always been a deeply personal and nostalgic experience that holds a deep connection to her childhood, and writing poems enables her to express the small moments that can be some of the most significant in our lives.
Hi, I'm Lila Bovenzi, a Spanish major in URI's class of 2022, and this is Witch's Brew. Leaves and muck and weeds you plucked, and other things that grew. These were all ingredients, and your young witch's brew. Tulips went for tongue of dog, and twigs for eye of newt. For lack of dragon scales, you stir in seeds of ripened fruit. Cauldron fashioned from a bucket, carried magic, dusk to dawn, infused with clumps of grass, which you tore up from your front lawn. It stewed beneath the summer sun for hours, sometimes days. Upon retrieval, you were swallowed whole by perfume haze. You poured it on the roots of all your favorite plants and flowers, with clumsy incantation through which nature granted powers. Now that you've grown up, you wish you could have saved a jar, for every dream of wonder, once so close, now seems so far. But pure imagination guides your pen, and so you think that maybe Witch's Brew has turned that water into ink. Thank you.
Coincidentally, my children, 6 and 10, have just made potions, magic potions. And in part, thanks to Lila's inspiration, I'm going to be sure to save some for when they're older. Now I'd like to introduce Afua Ansong, who is a scholar and an artist currently pursuing a PhD in English literature at the University of Rhode Island. Her creative and her scholarly work explores the Adinkra symbols and their uses in West Africa and the United States. Her most recent collection of poems, Try Kissing God, was published by the African Poetry Fund in 2020.
I am so excited to be here and getting a little emotional, hearing all these poems and seeing my dream sort of come to life. I'm going to be introducing Professor Honorée Jeffers. So in my recent conversation with Professor Jeffers, who I now regard as my literary aunt, and she's given me the honor to call her that, she described herself as a mystic. Doing the work of the anointed requires a calling, and with this calling comes trauma, suffering, and the responsibility to honor ancestors like Phyllis Wheatley Peters. It became very clear a few minutes into the interview that by writing The Age of Phillis, Jeffers had reached into the past to draw into the present a spiritual force of truth and transformation about the Black woman. The blessing on this book flows like the oil running from Aaron's head to his beard. For over 20 years, Honorée Fanonne Jeffers has been lifting her voice on issues of Black culture, racism, American history, and gender through the medium of writing. Her most recent collection, The Age of Phillis, which came out in 2020, was longlisted for the National Book Award in Poetry and won the 2021 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work in Poetry. She's also the author of The Gospel of Barbecue, Outlandish Blues, Red Clay Suit, and The Glory Gets. Jeffers is also a prose writer and author of the forthcoming novel, The Love Songs of W.E. Du Bois. She's a recipient of fellowships from the American Antiquarian Society, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Vermont Studio Center, the Witter Bynner Foundation through the Library of Congress, and the Tennessee Williams Scholarship in Fiction from the Sewanee Writers Conference. She was also the winner of the Emergent Fiction Fellowship from the Aspen Summer Words Conference and recently was honored with the 2018 Harper Lee Award for Literary Distinction, a Lifetime Achievement Award. She is a full professor of English at the University of Oklahoma. It is my honor to welcome my auntie, Professor Honorée Jeffers.
Thank you, niece. I appreciate you. And it's so funny because I did not know that you were writing about the Adinkra symbols when I hung this on my wall. So thank you so much. I'm sure I'm going to forget some people, but I am very, very grateful to Dr. Martha Elena Rojas, as well as Dean Riley, Leah Cooper, who is our brilliant goddess who put this together, and of course, my literary niece, Afua Ansong. I'm going to read first from The Age of Phillis, and then I'll read maybe about 10 minutes from my forthcoming novel. The smelting of iron in West Africa, someplace in antiquity, date unknown. Utilitarian, then at some point, an embrace of beauty, a glow. The man waits, a picture in his head. He will claw out the dream's tincture, pour it into mold, and in that dream, he has met the hyena laughing about chains. The man will pound metal to forget that grievous sound. He will master what was brought from earth, from viscera's need, until his hand sees. He will do this work, and his son will do the same, and it will be written upon the griot's skull. I am going to read about Miss Phyllis's childhood. And so there are 3 names that you need to know. Actually 4. The first 3 names are Yai, Bai, and Gune. Yai means mother in the Wolof language. Bai means father in the Wolof language. And Gune means little baby child in the Wolof language. I imagined that Miss Phyllis was of the Wolof people of the Senegambia region. We will never know. Some have speculated that she may have been Mandinka as well. So I begin with an epigraph from Langston Hughes, from Genius Child. This is a song for the genius child. Sing it softly, for the song is wild. Mothering, number 1. Yai, someplace in the Gambia, circa 1753. After the afterbirth is delivered, the mother stops holding her breath. The midwife gives what came before her just wash pain, her insanity pain, and undeserved pain, a God-given pain. Oh, 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 pain, drum talking pain, witnessing pain. Allah, a mother offers you this gift. Praise you find it acceptable. Her living pain, her creature pain, her pretty little baby pain. Fathering, number 1. By someplace in the Gambia, circa 1753. After the required time, the seclusion to fool scream-faced souls, the naming ceremony. People arrive with gifts for the closed-eyed baby with no sense, separate into men and women. They do not count their children like bad-lucked livestock. They eat, they talk, chew cola, pray at the required times, then eat. Still eat. The baby unaware of her meaning. In years, her father's expectation, her body hailing a good bride price that she might sing forth sons, if she prays as well. At any rate, boys clearly hear the loudest greeting, births to be cherished, tribal hierarchy, God, him only, or grouped translated stars, a man, his wife, maybe two more. A girl sits right at the bottom, and yet her father carries her high. With this bone gourd, he has become someone. Dafa Refet, which means it is beautiful in the Wolof language. Yai, Bai, and Gune, someplace in the Gambia, circa 1756. When mother and child walk from the village to gather fruit, faces recite quotidian love. Do you have peace? Wow, wow, Jamrek. Then they are alone, and the toddler points out the fat-bottomed baobab, the mango with its frustrating reach. Mother pierces a low-hanging jewel, and her small shadow trills gratitude. Yai, you are so nice. Wow, wow. Yai, I love you so. Wow, wow. No demonstration, but a hand touching the tender head that was braided over cries. Later that night, the father must listen too. Bye, I ate a mango. Wow, wow. Bye, I saw a bug. Wow, wow. The child sits closer to his mat, whispers ambiguous lights. I know all the things. And he does not answer, but smiles at his wife. Their daughter is a marvel, and they must pray for humility. And I should mention that that poem is dedicated to Charlie Erickson, who was a toddler, and his father, Paul Erickson, is one of my dearest friends. And Charlie said that to his father, Papa, I know all the things. And so I thought I would write him a poem. Before the taking of Gune, someplace in the Gambia, circa 1759. History is the word for my purposes here. This child frail, not quite whole, not the leader of the gang, the strange understanding to be revealed. Is she dancing with the others? Is there a shaking of tail feathers, a nonsense ditty? Shimmy to the west, shimmy to the east, shake it, shake it, shake it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. A sharing of secrets with a lagging friend. I'm full of questions. I can ask history what I want. I can forget the rest. Why will the slave raiders snatch a thin, sickly girl? Why not leave her behind for the usual spoils, the men with clubs, the charcoaled village, the old ones, the babies? I can say no. We won't speak about that. I can keep returning to this blank someplace before her taking. The story of the red cloth not yet laid out, a genius child playing brightness in a mother's crown, a pearl if she lives by the sea, the strand of a gathered plait needed point. Surely love doesn't rest in emptied air without some disappointment, but this is a good moment, isn't it? I can run to my own playground, remember a cupped palm next to my ear. I can call my mother who is yet alive. I can claim my memories. She can answer her ringing telephone. I won't forget her name or mine. fracture. West Africa, circa 15th century to 19th century. The men arrive. Slave ships are anchored. The men arrive. The traders gather. The men arrive. The traders march. The men arrive. The war is waged. The men arrive. The fire comes. The men arrive. The people run. The men arrive. The chase begins. The men arrive. The dead abandoned. The men arrive. The iron sounds. The men arrive. The people march. The men arrive. The sea, the sea. The men arrive, the traders haggle. The men arrive, the silver laughs. The men arrive, the castle groans. The men arrive, the door opens. The men arrive, the water welcomes. The men arrive, the morning longs. The men arrive, our names shall scatter. Point of no return. Somewhere on the windward coast, West Africa, circa 1761. Keep the men from muttering among themselves, parsing the air's dying scent, the water, arms clutching at mirthful spirit, back to this bereft lexicon, Dante's castle on the rocky isle, captured bodies twirled around the obscene, and what cannot be released is that loud kindred laugh, humanity split along colonial charms, virgin girls in one sail, do what you wish. Double back to naming Gree town crying in hail. Place your hands on the bone map of 15 million women with fallen breasts in another. Trapped in a century's enlightened whims, forgive these men of 3 centuries ago, according to the tenets of baptized slave ships. Forgive, forgive, or do not. No children, unless that is your taste. An issue of mercy, number 1. Before I keep reading, Marty, can you tell me where I am on time? I want people rolling their eyes at me. An issue of mercy.
I think we're doing great.
Okay.
You're totally fine.
All right. An issue of mercy, number 1. Mercy, girl. What the mother might have said, pointing at the sun rising, what makes life possible, then drip the bowl of water reverent into oblivious earth. Was this prayer for her? Respect for the dead, or disappeared, an act to please a genius child? Her daughter would speak of water, bowl, sun, light arriving, light gone, sometime after the nice white lady paid and named her for the slave ship. Mercy. What the child called Phillis would claim after that sea journey. Let's call it that. Let's lie to each other. Not early descent into madness, naked travail among filth and rats. What got Phillis over that sea? What kept a stolen daughter? Perhaps it was mercy. Dear Rita, mercy. Dear brethren, water, bowl, sun, mothering, God's milky sound, morning shards, and a mother wondered if her daughter forgot her real name, refused to envision the rest, baby teeth missing, and somebody wrapping her treasure barely in a dirty carpet. 'twas mercy. You know the story, how we've lied to each other. An issue of mercy number 2, the transatlantic journey of Gune, circa summer 1761. Peas mashed with possibly tainted fish, a daily pint of water, no blankets, mother, father, clothes, underwear, dance of modesty. Why the threats of diphtheria, tetanus, malaria, smallpox, diarrhea, dehydration, common cold, diseases, rape? Why the screaming of the grown shelf mates, a woman or two giving birth, newborns kept by sailors or capriciously tossed to sharks? Why the banquet of placenta left for rats, the shackled, the crowded, begging to be killed? Why germs and tribes rechristened Negro chattering below vomit? Why no bleach? Why no soap to clean the effluvia of prayer? Why did she survive asthma and fear on that journey? Why didn't the ring in her nose get infected? Why did she have to sleep marinating in her own shit and piss? Why not death in the middle of this? Why did this child survive? Lord, Lord, have mercy. Two more poems. We are now in Boston, and the child called Phyllis Wheatley, or the child is purchased by Susanna Wheatley and named Phyllis after the slave ship. Susanna Wheatley and John Wheatley have 2 living children, and one is named Mary. Desk of Mary Wheatley, where she might have taught the child, renamed Phyllis to read. Winter, 1763. The dark wood, no match for the gorgeous ebony of the child who leans against it, while a taller girl teaches her artful curves and symbols, the power of letters arranged in a row. Easy, the ABCs, then short words, but counting is different. In Phyllis's home, the Wolof number in groups of 5, but only possessions or livestock. It is a bad luck proposition to count your offspring. You might as well prepare their funeral winding. But the learning of English is easy, the sound of it, then reading. When Mary marries the Reverend, this desk will go with her. But that is for later. In this room, she's a maiden, covered by the name of her father, who is away trading in dry goods, and 1 or 2 slaves. The mother sits in a cushioned chair, looking up from her sewing at the 2 girls, the oldest pointing at the page, the baby rounding her mouth. There is compassion in dust and sun. If Susanna tilts her head, she can deceive herself that another daughter is quick from the grave, that Sarah is the girl who laughs. Anyone can rise from the dead, for isn't Phyllis here and breathing? And wasn't her ship a coffin? I think I'll end there with the poems. And I'm only going to read a few minutes from my novel, The Love Songs of W.B. Du Bois, I wondered about what to read because this is a big novel. My baby is chubby. But I thought that I would read something that combined the complicated history of this land in Georgia called Chickasetta, Georgia. And the protagonist of the novel is named Ailey Pearl Garfield, and her family lives on a farm that is owned by white people, the Pinchards, and they're tenant farmers. And I chose to read from this section because it's about Uncle Root, and Uncle Root is a very old man, but he is Ailey's best friend. He's in his 80s and Ailey is 15, but they really love each other. And so this is a short section of the book that describes the complicated history of Ailey's family. The other thing I should say is that Uncle Root's given name is Jason. This is Dr. Jason Freeman Hargrace, but everybody calls him Root. Though Uncle Root and his late wife had visited his relatives often, they had never lived in Chickasetta as a couple. They both taught at Rutledge College and resided in the faculty house until she passed away in the 1950s. Their apartment had been small, but Uncle Root told me they'd liked their lodgings. They were only 25 miles away from family, but far enough to maintain their privacy. It took 2 decades after Aunt Olivia died for Uncle Root to buy his first house in Chickasetta. That place had been in the designated black part of town called Crow's Roost, but the street that the old man had lived on was the fanciest one in that neighborhood, where the one black doctor, one black lawyer, and every black teacher had lived. In the early 1980s, Uncle Root had bought his second house in Chickasetta after he'd retired from teaching. He was the first African American to live in his new neighborhood, which was called the Silk Stocking District among the white families in town. He bought the house at a rock bottom price when an elderly white couple passed away. The wife, and soon after, the husband, and their children had no desire to move back home. The house was imposing with 9 huge rooms, 10-foot ceilings, and a wraparound porch. Mere hours after Uncle Root moved in, somebody left a bucket of spoiled fried chicken crawling with wormy opaque bugs on his front porch. The next bugs on his front porch. The next week, a case of malt liquor. Then a ripe watermelon, which he'd kept, and it had been quite delicious. It took months for the harassment to stop. When I asked Uncle Root why he'd purchased a house in a neighborhood where he knew he wasn't wanted, he replied it had been 1983, not 1883. Further, he'd like to stomp on people's last nerves, and since he'd retired and didn't have a job to keep him occupied, fighting with racist white folks gave him pleasure. Those things left on his porch were harmless, he told me. Nobody had burned a cross on his lawn or tried to hurt him, and he wasn't scared of violence anyway. If one of those white folks decided to actually come for him, well, he'd lived a good long life. Whenever God called him, he'd be satisfied. But Uncle Root's mother might have fainted if she'd lived to see her son owning a house in an all-white neighborhood. Even the father of her children hadn't lived in the same house as she had. There had been a racial dividing line on the farm, which was the road that edged the lawn of the old plantation house. Once you crossed that road, you were in the African American portion of the farm. The other advantage of where the old man lived was that his very good friend lived close by, a white lady named Cordelia Pinchard Rice. On a walk one day, he told me that Miss Cordelia was his niece. Nobody else would call us relatives, least of all Cordelia, but yes, we are related. Big Tom Pinchard was her grandfather. His wife died in childbirth, but the baby boy lived, Tommy Jr., named after his father. When he grew up and married, his wife had Cordelia. Ladies died having babies? I asked. For real? Ailing women always risk their lives in labor. That's one reason it's so important to cherish mothers always. Isn't that right? Yes, sir, I said. After his first wife died, Big Tom met my mother, Lil May, and fell in love with her. Because she was a Negro, she couldn't be his legal wife, but she had my sister Pearl and me, your great-grandmother. That was a big scandal in this town, but my father didn't care. I was 11 when my mother passed away. The Spanish influenza epidemic, don't you know? I've never loved another person the way I loved her, not even Olivia. I don't think my heart ever recovered from my mother's passing. He was sharing a secret, like a friend. I needed to respond to let him know I understood the moment. I tried one of the phrases Mama often used, talking on the phone with our Chickasetta relatives. Sure enough, I walked closer to him, brushing against his seersucker jacket. He cleared his throat a few times. Yes, indeed, Sugarfoot. I'm so sorry for your loss. I appreciate your saying that. Your mother is named for mine. Did you know that? Yes, but she changed it last year. She gets cranky now when Daddy calls her Maybelle Lee. He does it to tease her. Sugarfoot, let me ask you something. What kind of name is Belle Marie? Doesn't that sound pretentious to you? Well, look at you, so loyal. How about we go back to my house and I'll try to teach you how to beat me in chess? He put his arm around my shoulders and I put my arm around his waist. We slowed down our stride as country folks like to do. At the house, he pointed out the pictures on his credenza, naming everyone. Most of their subjects had passed on, now only living within the frames. He pointed out the largest image of a man, a girl, and a very little boy. The man and boy were white. This was taken at the 1895 Atlanta Cotton Exposition. Uncle Root tapped each figure in the picture. That's my father, that's my mother, and that's my big brother. Big Tom was a portly man dressed in a light-colored three-piece and a straw hat. He towered over LeMay, a petite dark girl in a striped dress. Her hair was braided in a coronet, and she stood very erect and serious. Tommy Jr. stood between them, holding the hands of both, but his head leaned in Lil May's side. The boy smiled, revealing missing front teeth, a happy blonde child in his sailor suit. My sister Pearl, your great-grandmother, and I hadn't yet been born. Mama was 14 here, so my father must have been 36 or 37, something like that, and way too old for my mother. After she died, Big Tom used to tell me he'd been a complete gentleman. He didn't start courting Mama until she turned 18, but I've always wondered if he said that to seem a better man than what he truly was. He built the house for her after Pearl was born. Cordelia let us live in the house after Tommy Jr. died, and that's where your granny lives now. I was supposed to move in and take it over after Pearl passed away, but I already had my own home. And even if I'd been homeless, I wouldn't have lived in that house for anything in the world. My mother was ostracized by our entire Negro community for living there. They shamed her for being my father's mistress. And then they shamed me because I carried his skin color. And if I moved into that house, it would be like I was all right with that. And I wasn't all right. So goddamn that stupid ass house. He caught his breath. Goodness. Excuse my language, Sugarfoot. You're fine, Uncle Root, but you can't curse anymore for the rest of the week. I nudged him and he laughed. Thank y'all so much. I appreciate you.
Wow. Thank you. I have been sitting behind the stage smiling and with so much excitement with the energy that you're bringing to the stage. And to the audience, you can share your question in the chat. I want to begin and ask, the musicality that you have in your reading. I didn't feel like this was a reading. I felt like it was more of a stage play, and I was really engaged. When you were writing The Age of Phillis, or even for this novel, how did you move into the characters, and did you embody, like I'm thinking of the body of Phillis Wheatley Peters and you moving or, transitioning into that body and becoming, that body, and then writing about the experience, and then moving out as a poet or a writer, and then, going over whatever you've written. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, let me first say thank you, Brother Jared. Thank you. I'm just watching the chat. Well, I worked on this book for 15 years. Okay, with the research, in the archives, as well as secondary texts. In 2012, I married a West African man from Senegal. We are no longer together, but I loved him dearly. And he was of the Wolof people. And when I don't need to tell you this, you are actually West African. When you marry a West African, thank you, Dean Riley. When you marry, thank you, Heidi. When you marry into a West African family, you don't just marry, the person. You marry the whole, family. And so on our honeymoon, which was actually not truly a honeymoon because I was there doing research in London, he was there in graduate school. We lived in an extended household, and there was a little boy there. We called him Papico, and because he was named after his grandfather, right? And he was a cranky little boy, and he didn't like me. Sometimes, and I'm not used to that. I'm used to particularly little boys. I have a magic with little boys. Okay. So I was just like, what is wrong with this child? And sometimes he would love me, and then other times he wouldn't. He was very sometimey. But he was a brilliant child. And he was 3.5, going on 4. So he's still technically a toddler. And he spoke 4 languages.
Wow.
So he spoke French, he spoke English, he spoke Wolof, and then he spoke his father's. His father was from Cult of Domesticity, right? And so I've written a poem about living in this household. There are outtakes, probably 20, 30 poems that didn't make it into the book. So I'm just letting people know that I will have a selected poems, but there won't be anything from the Age of Phillis because I want my press to get that money from the book. So the outtakes from the Age of Phillis will be there. And I saw this little boy and I thought about what kind of child Miss Phillis would be, right? Very, very brilliant. And so that's how I sort of got into it, right? And then for the 10 days where I met my ex-husband, the 10 days that I was in Senegal, I saw men, I've talked about this before, I saw men carrying their children, and they would carry them up, right? They would be like, I made this, you know.
Yeah, like a showcase.
Right. See what I hath wrought, you know. And you would say, especially with the little girls, you would say, your little girl is so beautiful. And they would say, oui, you know, or they say in French, oui, or they'd say, wow, which means, you know, yes and willow. So they would say, yes, you know, like basically, I know, you know, my child is real pretty. Right. This is my child. I made this human being, you know, alhamdulillah, you know. And so, so I'm someone who watches. Okay. So I would watch. And then over here, when my ex-husband came over here when we were still married, I found a Gambian family. And one of the things, and again, you know this, about West Africans is they tend to know different languages. Yep. Okay. We are very, you know, ooh, it's English or nothing, you know. But I mean, he's now my dear friend. So I found him, Dr. Balasaho. I found him so that my ex-husband would have, you know, Africans to hang around, and right, he could speak well up. And you know, the thing about African folks is you can't just stop by for a half hour.
No, you can't.
A whole day, right? And you come in, you try to leave, they're like, we have jollof.
Yes, and you have to stay for the jollof rice, right?
For the jollof, okay? And then they're like, you are making tea. You cannot leave, you know. And so we would go over there and be like an 8-hour situation, right? And you try to leave, and Bala like, where you going, man? Where are you going? So Bala speaks Swedish, Italian, English, Mandinka, Wolof, and Pular.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. He's a brilliant man, but very modest. Because he's from the village, right? He always tells me that. And I'm always saying, you know, if I could speak 5, 6 languages, couldn't nobody tell me. Okay? I'd be like, I don't know you. Don't approach me.
Yes.
I am smarter than all y'all in this
Exactly.
room. So when I would go over there and I would see, you know, so you pick up that and you begin to imagine. But also the thing is that, you know, I began to see many connections between that and my Southern Black rearing, because that was the same, you know, it's an all day thing, you know, when you visit with Southern Black folks, you know, we gonna kick it. We're going to kick it, and it's going to be some meat on the table, some macaroni and cheese. You know, it's going to be food. Don't nobody want to show up and don't eat. I mean, we eat at our dance parties.
Yes.
We're like, over there against the wall is food, right? And you have to eat, right? So it's a thing. So I could envision, you know, just in those short poems, I envisioned that. And I have, you know, sections in the novel about Africa. Okay, just you know, I have sections in the novel about Africa. I didn't read from the songs. The songs are the historical portions that are woven through the contemporary portions, because you got to get into the songs. You can't do 10 minutes, right? That's like a 30-minute reading. You have to get into the songs. So, but people, I hope, will be pleased with the fact that I'm going to read different sections from, during the bookstore tour. I'm not going to read the same, sections over and over. So I'll get into some of that. So that's how I was able to do that. And then if, you're just talking about performance, well, I used to sing with a blues band.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. I contain multitudes, niece. I used to sing with a blues band, and that's how I started writing blues poetry, right? All of my books of poetry contain the blues. And I would say The Love Songs of W.B. Du Bois is a blues novel, because though there are really heavy historical portions, there is humor that weaves through the tragedy, right? And so, and that's very blues. But so, yeah, I don't know if I answered your full question, but.
Yeah, I think that works into the idea of musicality, and even the idea of having to go into Africa and being, part. I think of marriage as being one with someone, and so being part of a body of Africans. So it's sort of like transcended, and it's like flowing in you. And I really, really love that energy. The students have some really exciting questions that they want to ask.
Beth had a question. Do we want to? Is that okay for me to call Mary Beth's question?
Yes.
Mary Beth Riley McGreen. Ooh, this is fancy.
Okay.
Have a shout out to our technical goddess,
Leah.
This is fantastic. I'm not a doctor, I'm a professor. Okay. Would Dr. Jeffers talk about how she conceived of and formed the mistress' attempts to instruct her slave in the writing of a poem? It is a wonder in form and content. Well, first of all, thank you so much. And you blessed me with those words. Well, one of the things about Susanna Wheatley is she's a complicated figure, okay? That past white scholars have tried to say it's uncomplicated. She's, she's the center. That's how they do that. They center her. She is responsible for everything that Miss Phillis did. And then once she dies, everything goes downhill. And I push back against that. Because Miss Phillis had parents, and it is not possible for someone who trades in slaves to be a parent. So what I would like people to consider, that perhaps the most accurate framework because it's very different than when you have a white mother who has, had a child by a man of color. That's a totally different, that's her child. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But somebody whose husband is trading in slaves, that's problematic, right? And I think that we have to be aware that the other thing is people are like, she was so nice to love this little Black child. And I always look at people and say, love is every child's birthright. That is not extraordinary.
Speak it.
When you come out of the vessel, right? I don't want to say maternal, because there are some, men now who give birth, right? But when you come out, that is, you are supposed to be loved.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that people really need to be very aware of how racist it is to act as if it is extraordinary. I love you, Heidi. Act as if it's extraordinary that you love, a Black child. But I don't want to throw Susanna Wheatley under the bus. It's very complicated. So that particular poem, First of all, I've read Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral, like 50 times, a lot. And I always encounter something new. And so in Niobe, I think I'm pronouncing that right, in Distress, it says down at the bottom, some particular line has been written by another's hand. Okay. This is one of the things, like, I know there's some scholars that are cranky because here I am, I haven't, I don't have a doctorate, blah, 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 but I'm like, I am nosy, right? I'm nosy.
Yeah.
And that's how I see things or notice things that nobody has at least talked about noticing.
Yeah.
Okay?
You have a critical eye, right?
You have a critical eye, and I'm incredibly smart. I just don't have an affect. You understand? I think it's very important for me to be a regular sister so that people can see that this, this chocolate brown body.
Say it.
This big chocolate brown body and this Southern accent can hold brilliance. Right? I think that's very important. And I have fought very hard to keep, being a sure, I'm sedity, but to keep this regular, affect, because I think that it's important for people to understand. And after all, my mother's father could not read and write. Okay. And my mother is a first generation college graduate, and who then went on to get a doctor. I don't need to be Dr. Jeffers. She's Dr. Jeffers. Okay. So, and her people were tenant farmers. So I think it's very important that people understand that this is what a scholar looks like and talks like. And I don't have to genuflect at the altar of white male post-structuralists in order to show you, watch me work. Okay. So the thing about it is that I noticed these things, right? And then I thought, well, who was trying to change her poetry? Could it be Susanna? And so then one of the things, I like to do this a lot. I like to have different voices. Susanna, is on the right side, but it looks like the left side. So I'm going to do this, even though this is my left side. Susanna is on the right side. Miss Phillis is on, the left side. And then in the middle, there's what is true for both. And so you can read it. And I always tell people, you can read it 1, 2, 3, or you can read it across. I have several points like that. Chorus of the mother's griot, right? Because there are female griots in West Africa. Okay. And a lot of people don't know that. You know that. Right? And we need to go to Africa together.
We need to plan a trip.
We need to go to Africa together. But I'm supposed to be going to the Gambia, if God says the same, this fall. Okay. I was supposed to go last year for I was supposed to be presenting at the global CPAC conference, and then, and then Corona happened. So, and then I also should say, one of the reasons I have a deep connection, which I'm still cranky about the slave trade. So it's very complicated, right? Come on, niece. You gotta admit it. Africans were enthusiastically involved, right? I'm still really cranky. But, I have three brothers. I call them my trois frères, right? Kwame Das, the great Kwame Das, a dear friend. Chris Abani and Matthew Shimon, all of them are dear friends. And they pulled me in to do things, for African literature and all of that, African poetry specifically, when I was married to my ex-husband. And then after we divorced, I said, I'm not going to let go of, and then I just started being friends with Bala. But, Dr. Saho, he's one of my dearest. He's actually my closest friend on campus.
Oh, wow.
Right. I'm friends with him, his wife, because you got to be friends with the wife, too, when somebody's married. Otherwise, it's inappropriate.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Right. So yeah, that's how I got into that.
Okay. There are a lot of interesting questions. We're gonna get the question from Alexis, and then
Hi, my name is Alexis Noriega. I am a junior at the University of Rhode Island, majoring in film with a minor in business and English. My question for you is, what were your biggest hesitations or fears as an author, and what did you do to overcome those fears and hesitations? Thank you.
Oh, that's a beautiful question. Well, I hope I don't upset the atheists in the room. Okay. And no shade by saying that. Okay. I am unabashedly a God lover. I'm a very spiritual person. And so, I pray all the time. It was a long journey though, for me to claim being a writer. Ain't no money in writing, right? ain't no money in writing, right? Like, what's up? Can't you go to law school, girl? I still have dreams about I went to law school. I still got dreams about I went to law school.
It ain't too late, girl. It ain't too late.
It's way too late. No, it's not. If I wanted to, I could. Okay. But I have no desire to be a lawyer. My late sister, Cedar Nicolette Jeffers, the novel is dedicated to her and my late friend, James William Richardson Jr., as well as my mother, who is still living. So Cece, as we call her, was a graduate of Howard University Law, Moot Court Law Review, very brilliant woman. And also the one that always would say, get in writing and keep your receipts. Okay. Keep your receipts, keep your documents. So, it's very difficult, because until I just won the NAACP award, do you know? Now, my mama is always like, my baby is doing this.
Yes.
This and
that's what the mothers are there for.
That's what moms do, right? They your hype girl, right? Yeah. But the rest of them was like, honey, I won that NAACP award, and within like 30 minutes, I was getting, this, that, and the other, because that's the first award they had heard of, right? I didn't even know white folks had heard of the NAACP award. So people were on Twitter like, congratulations. I'm like, how do white people heard of the Image Award? I mean, I was grateful, but I was confused. Okay. I ain't know white people knew about this, right? It's National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Okay. So I was like, how had they heard of this colored award? But I just, my mother was very supportive of me, but her brothers and sisters were not. And there were discussions about, when you gonna get a real job and, blah, 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 blah. You could teach high school. You could do this, that, and the other. There was a lot of derision and thinly veiled contempt. But this is what I tell my students. Professor Jeffers does not decide that you're a writer. Your mama and daddy, or whoever made you, work that out between themselves. Okay? When they came together to make this human being, as the young cats say, when they went half on a baby, right? when they went half on a baby, they made you. Okay. I don't decide that you are a writer.
Exactly.
I am here to guide you and teach you this craft, but you were born a writer. And so I would say to the brilliant young lady who asked the wonderful question, if you're a writer, you ain't gonna be able to let it go. You may not ever publish, but you're never going to let it go. That's how I knew that I wasn't a blues singer, because I didn't dream about being a blues singer. I didn't ache to be a be a blues singer, but I had been writing ever since, I was like 6. I mean, it was bad, of course, but I'd been writing ever since I was a child. And the other thing was that then we move on to the next question. The other thing was everything was hard for me. And then when I became a writer, it was like breathing.
Wow.
It was effortless. Not the writing, but the time.
Yeah.
I was just, I would look up and it would be 1 o'clock. And then I'd look up again and it'd be midnight. And I wouldn't know where the time had gone. So I would say, if you're a writer, it's going to stay with you. But you, there are going to be a lot of haters. And you're just going to have to, keep the faith.
Yeah. Just the idea of walking in that purpose and that calling. I totally agree.
And it is a calling.
Yeah.
It's a calling. Yeah.
The next question is from Professor Peter Covino, who is my major professor.
Hey, Covino, how are you?
He wants to know if you're doing repetition and music in general in your work.
Oh, yes. I read my poems out loud a lot. Okay. Like over and over and over and over and over and over. Sometimes though, like the music will come to me. Like there's a poem that I published last year on the Academy of American Poets. It was one of those poem a day. And the brilliant January Gill O'Neill had asked me, but she had such a short period of time. So she asked me to do it. Was like 24 hours. I was Lord Jesus. But I keep, little things, so I was looking at it and I wanted it to be almost like a scripture called Selah, right? And it's about Black Lives Matter, even though you might not know that, right? And so in the middle of it, I break into song, oh, that I may give air to my people, oh, interruption of murder, the welcome Selah. So, it was, but my uncle was a deacon in the church, in the Primitive Baptist Church, and Flat Rock Primitive Baptist. There was line singing, so they would give you a line. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Amen. And all the old people would just, keep on going. And that's also because, when you're talking about with very old Black people back in the day, not all of them were literate. Okay. So you can't open up a hymnal for everybody. Okay. And keep in mind that wasn't because of laziness or whatever, because the schools were so crappy and racist.
Exactly.
My mother used to talk about how when she would walk to school, the white kids had a bus, they would spit out of the windows at her, right? And then also children whose parents were sharecroppers the white foreman would show up to the school and point out the children whose parents lived on their land and said, come on. And so they have to interrupt their schools. Right. So yeah, that, I mean, just to take a tangent, but that, yeah. So, I grew up with music. My father played jazz piano, by heart, right? He knew by heart. My mother had once been in the she's a graduate of Spelman College Glee Club. So music is very important. I think in most Black people's lives, music is very important.
I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree. We're going to take the last question from Toyin.
Hello, my name is Oluwatoyin Teokile. I'm an English major of the class of 2021. I found The Age of Phillis a really fascinating read. When I was reading the concluding essay about your research into Margaretha Odell's memoirs and the lack of proof connecting Odell to the Wheatleys, and how no one had seemed to question Odell's authority on the life of Phillis Wheatley, all of which was very thought-provoking, what especially caught my eye was the traditional characterization of John Peters by writers as a bad husband, that he was a low-down disruption that led to her demise, which of course reminds me of the stereotype of the black man as a threat to society and to women, and how you instead desire to flesh him out in your poetry. What I would like to ask is about your considering of Mr. Peters as a natural occurrence in the young black poet's trajectory. How does his romance with Phillis represent a culmination of Willie's journey as both a writer and as a person, especially in relation to her relationship with the pagan land of Africa?
So everybody asks about, first of all, let me say this. In January 2020, there was an article, finally, after I had been demanding for 10 years, that there was a genealogy linking Margaretha Matilda Odell to the Wheatleys. So we finally do have a genealogy that links her to the Wheatleys. But even though we do, I think it is incredibly unrealistic, if not just downright stupid and ridiculous, for someone to think that a white woman born after Miss Phillis died would know anything about her inside marriage. Okay. Black women don't talk to white women about their marriages now. So I don't think that's realistic. Right. And the other thing is that people need to know that when Odell was, Odell, because the biggest issue now is, did Odell actually write that memoir? We have no provenance for the manuscript.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not down with somebody saying so, and that's okay. I need to see written proof. Okay. And there's no written proof. The written proof is that Benjamin Bussey Thatcher wrote one of those memoirs, and then Odell's memoir is identical to Thatcher's memoir. So we know that one of those people plagiarized from the other. What may have happened is she gave him her stories and he wrote them down, but we still don't know.
Okay.
But I think that, first of all, I would like for us to stop calling her Phyllis. We do not call white men Tom, and we do not call, and George, we call them Thomas Jefferson or Jefferson. I've noticed that people don't, and that's not my being harsh to the brilliant young lady, Miss Toyin. I'm wondering if Toyin is Yoruba, because I can recognize those names, right? Yeah.
You're on the right.
Right. I recognize them names. So I do, I don't want to be harsh, but I would like for us to, stop acting like she's our best friend or whatever. Right. And even in Vincent Coretta's book, he calls her Phyllis throughout. right? And that's typically not what scholars do. So anyway, in terms of when the O'Dale, I always use this, memoir came out, that was right around the time of the Cult of Domesticity, right? Which privileged middle and upper middle class white women and, you know, their household and all of that. But what we need to know is that the Cult of Domesticity excluded poor white women and women of color. So there's this purposeful sort of sentimentality that goes into talking about Susanna Wheatley and all of that, right? The thing about John Peters is, and then I'm going to get to the pagan thing. I mean, people fall in love. Young people like to have sex. They like to have sex. They like to get married. They like to live with each other. I don't really understand what the big deal is. Like, people are always like, John Peters. I'm like, I mean, I know when I was a young person, that's what I wanted to have sex. I hope I'm not being gross, but it is what it is. You know, so I think that's one thing, right? You know, okay. And she was Black. She was Black. He was Black. Black love squared.
They got together.
They got together, right? I think that people need to be very aware of the fact that there was a depression going on in the aftermath of the American Revolution. And so if we want to place that into context, we can think about, you know, God bless them, all of these people that have lost their jobs, you know, during last year, and all of that's what was going down. Yeah. You know, in the aftermath of the American Revolution, only worse. Okay. We also need to think about, we have modern debtors prison now. People can be placed, especially in the South, Black people being placed in jail for failure to pay bills. You know, you have court costs, all of that. This is what was going on. That's how John Peters ended up in debtors prison. So I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's, you know, one of the things, Niece, that I noticed when I went to Africa, which really changed the way that I looked at poverty. And I'm not trying to, you know, I don't hold Africa up on a pedestal, but I noticed that poor people were not viewed as having moral failings when I went to Senegal. It just was the luck of birth. That's it. You were either born into one particular family, or you weren't born. And that blew my mind.
Yep.
Because over here, it's like, you lazy. You should be. And, you know, even my mom, you know, because one of the most classist people in the world is a poor person that has clawed their way up to middle class. And my mother was, these people are just lazy. And, you know, da-da-da. And I said, Mama, that's not true. You know, that was when I came back from Africa. You know, you can't talk but a particular way to your mama, though. You got to be careful. And if you Black, yeah, you Black particularly, okay? And so there's a little scene in my novel where the protagonist, who is then a teenager, drops the F-bomb when she's talking to her mama, and her mama said, "You fix your mouth to cussing me one more time, I'm gonna get real crazy on you." Right? You know, you don't roll like that. So I was like, Mama, that's not true. And she said, you know, I did, da-da-da. And I said, Mama, you need to think about, you were extraordinary, but you shouldn't have to be extraordinary not to be poor. You shouldn't. So I think that that's the thing. I think that people looked at John Peters as if he was lazy. And that is the narrative that's in both the O'Dale memoir. And I'm doing this because there's her name is not on the title page. Okay. So, you know, and also the Thatcher version, which is nearly identical. and I'm getting to pagan and then we'll wrap up, that, it was like, he thought himself above doing this, that, and the other, that's in there. And I just think people, I don't have resentment toward white scholars for not questioning that, but I am deeply disappointed that Black scholars would not have pushed back against that. I'm just like, how you just gonna let them do that, brother, like that? And I'm a radical feminist, but I'm just like, how you just gonna let them do that, brother, like that? Automatically, he ain't nothing. Yeah, he ain't nothing. I'm like, how you gonna let somebody do that, brother, like that? So that has been deeply disappointing. I think the thing is that I am a scholar, but I don't have a PhD. And so the thing about it is that people are still pushing back against, what I say and da-da-da. And I'm like, that's fine. I brought my receipts. You bring yours, boo.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Receipts, okay? Because all of this is supposition and speculation, okay? So you need to be bringing receipts. So in terms of the pagan, there is an article by, I believe his first name is James, but the last name is Lavernier. And it's called, and that always happens when I write a book. I leave something, I forget something. And so it should have been maybe in the second edition of the Age of Phillis, which we've already sold out of a first printing. And I think we may already be close to selling out in a second printing. To God be the glory. But I forgot to exactly. I forgot. You get too Black. Maya Angelou used to say, God rest her soul, there's only 2 Black atheists in the world. Okay.
I gotta praise it.
Okay, we are not those atheists. No. But in Lavernier's essay is called Style as Protest in Phillis Wheatley's Poetry. I now call her Phillis Wheatley Peters, as you know, because that was the name that she chose. She chose to take Mr. John's last name. She actually did not go as Phillis Wheatley Peters. She went as Phillis Peters, right? But Lavernier talks about the use of italics and the use of quotation marks. So when you see that first line, 'twas mercy brought me from my italicized pagan land. And then there are other times, and then there's in quotes, their color is a diabolic dye. She doesn't say my color. It's third person. So that is somebody talking, and that's a white person. That's a side eye.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I feel emotional about her. Okay. I feel very close to her. And so there are things that, you notice when you come back over it, you come back over it. And female identified individuals, we just nosy anyway. We're like, your man go to the grocery store, you like, where you been? It didn't take that long to get that popcorn and such and such, right? So we're just like, we want that proof, right? So you come back to it. And so the other thing is mercy. First, there's the whole notion of, she's not saying thank you, white folks, for taking me away from my parents, because in another poem, as you know, niece, she talks about being snatched from Afrique's fancy happy seat. This is a paradise that she is describing. Okay. But the mercy, this is one of the reasons I have, the mercies all through is the survival.
Yeah.
Okay. But she's also alluding to Alexander Pope's translation of the Iliad, I believe, where it says something about abodes, dark abodes. All right. So I think that the one thing, and this is why this book is thick, and there's notes and there's a bibliography. Ooh, we were trying to flex. And I was like, no, I don't need to flex. this is for the people.
That's your receipts.
Right. I want people to see these receipts, because if you don't have a doctorate, they want them receipts. Now, if I had a doctorate, I could just be saying whatever I wanted to, some people who shall remain nameless have done, right? But when you have an MFA, they're like, well, she's not very bright. So I had to have the receipts. But right. So I do think that we need to be very careful about making assumptions. The other thing that I would urge people to do, the last thing I'll say, is to read her letters. You cannot get a full picture of Phillis Wheatley Peters from one poem. And there are a lot of people where, they're lazy. They read the one poem, they think, like it's a wrap.
Yeah, they close the book.
And I'm like, right, they read her one poem, and that's that one poem. 'Twas mercy brought me from, and they don't read the other poems that she's referencing Gambia and calling it pleasing Gambia. They don't read, right? So that's the one thing that they need to read the other poems, but they also need to read her letters. And they will see she was radical.
Oh, yeah.
She writes Samson Occam, the great Mohegan minister. And, she's talking about freedom and all of that. But nobody knows that because they only teach that one point. And unless you're taking an American literature class that is either taught by a very progressive white professor, or a progressive, BIPOC professor, or a progressive, Black professor, you're going to read one point. You're going to read that one poem, and then they're going to teach Frederick.
Yeah. Yep.
That's what they're going to do. Then they're going to teach Frederick Douglass, and then it's a wrap, and then it's all white people.
Yeah.
So I think that's it, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Auntie, for being generous with your time and being so passionate about this work that your soul has gone into. And I know we've talked behind the scenes about, being mentored by poets like Lucille Clifton, who I admire so much, and just seeing the idea of legacy, going back to, Phillis Wheatley Peters, and having that, lineage, seen through the work that you've produced. So thank you so much. I believe that the link to purchase your books has been placed in the comments. And so audience, please support this beautiful and very deep and meaningful work. We have come to a close of this fantastic and wonderful event, and hopefully we will see you next year. Happy National Poetry Month.
Thank you.